Hello everyone, my name is Rob, welcome to Kinetic Rugby League. In this video I'll be giving you my Super League Round 6 predictions. Just to quickly recap last week, or last round I should say, I got 6 out of 6. Unfortunately the Challenge Cup the week after I was 5 out of 6, so almost 2 perfect weeks back to back. But focusing on Super League, so far I've got 25 out of 30 games in total, which is a percentage of 83.33% on the winners. So we'll crack on with round 6 and hopefully get a perfect result. Starting off in round 6, we have Castleford Tigers versus Leeds Rhinos. Starting with league position, Castleford are in 11th, Leeds are in 6th. In terms of form, Castleford have won 0 of their 5 games, Leeds have won 3 of their 5 games. For me, it's very clear why Leeds are the overwhelming favourites. In defence, they look a lot stronger, given the way that they've competed against some of the better teams in the midfield. Catalans, St Helens near the top, Hull KR, like they are clearly showing signs that they are a genuine team. There doesn't really appear to be any sort of holes that Castleford could really poke through. Castleford themselves aren't really creating many opportunities, so on both sides of the ball they don't really have much going for them at the moment. Leeds are overwhelming favourites, and rightly so based on the performances they've given so far this season. We have seen that anything can happen, but on a these predictions are based on typical performances. So yeah, I always will typically back teams to get points. Very rarely that I pick teams to get 0 points. So I think Castleford can put some up because Leeds aren't a perfect team, but in all areas compared to Castleford they're just much stronger. So I'm expecting a fairly dominant win here. So I'm going to go with Castleford Tigers 10, Leeds Rhinos 32. Next up we have Hull Kingston Rovers versus Hull FC. Starting with league position, Hull KR are in 5th, Hull FC are in 10th in terms of current form. Hull KR have won 3 of their 5 games, Hull FC have only won 1 of their 5 games. So, looking at the huge contrast in performances from last week in the Challenge Cup, Hull KR were kind of up against it, against a team that in recent weeks had probably played tougher opponents. They looked about the same in terms of quality, but Hull KR also without Mikey Lewis was one of the reasons why I went with Salford, because Salford have been putting up great performances against good teams, and so have Hull KR, but it's just that miss of Mikey Lewis and the way that they were able to deal with that, and to not only just kind of deal with it and pull out the win, but to just completely dominate in that fashion was completely unexpected to me. I knew that Hull were a strong team, which is why I had a fairly close result to begin with, but to just completely dominate like that was just so unexpected. Hull FC, I gave them a bit of credit, thinking that an inconsistent Huddersfield team might, they might pose a challenge against them, but to then just be completely demolished wasn't necessarily unexpected, just kind of, bit of a waste that, isn't it? So I see nothing from Hull FC. I've seen nothing from Hull FC this season to indicate a challenge. Hull KR clearly the superior team, essentially the same way I'm looking at Leeds and Castleford, but I think the gap is even greater than that. Hull KR and Leeds are roughly speaking, within the same bracket, and Hull are roughly speaking within the same bracket as Castleford, whereas Hull KR slightly better than Leeds, Hull FC slightly worse than Castleford. So for me, the gap is just going to be bigger. Hull KR might concede 0 points this week. There's a good chance, but I always, as I said, will typically award points just because it is so difficult to hold teams to nil. So with that being said, I'm going to go with Hull KR 46, Hull FC 4. Next up we have the game of the round, St Helens versus Wigan Warriors. Starting with league position, Saints are in 3rd, Wigan in 2nd. In terms of current form, Saints have won 4 of their 5 games, Wigan have won 4 of their 4 Super League games. I recently put St Helens above Wigan in my power rankings. My justification was that Wigan struggled against 13 on 13 against Salford. St Helens, they competed well against Leeds. The two reasons why I'm kind of leaning towards Saints on this one. Number one is that Saints were consistent in their fight against Leeds, who are a strong team in Super League, and Wigan allowed Sheffield Eagles to be as competitive as they were for the first half of a Challenge Cup game. And looking at the squad that Wigan put out, for me, that's not acceptable. So to me, that justifies keeping St Helens above Wigan in my power rankings if I take the Challenge Cup game into account, which I will. It doesn't mean that it's going to be overwhelmingly Saints because, you know, comparing the two teams, they both play at an extreme pace. They can both dominate through the middle. They both spread the ball well, and they both shut teams down well. So I'm going to edge it towards St Helens just because of the recent performances and the consistency against Leeds. Leads me to think that in these tight games, they can get it done. A lot of people will point out the Wigan v Salford game, but I would argue that the manner in which they won, and just bear with me on this one, was not earned. I've used this before, where in a freak moment, they took the lead. They did also then score off their own backs, granted. But just in terms of recent performances, St Helens have looked a little bit cleaner. So therefore, I'm going to go with St Helens 18, Wigan Warriors 16. Next up, we have Warrington Wolves versus Catalans Dragons. Starting with league position, Warrington are in first, Catalans in fourth. In terms of current form, Warrington have won 4 of their 5 games. Catalans have also won 4 of their 5 games. Now, I took Warrington to win in round 1, and they probably should have done, given the circumstance that they were in. They were up by a man for a whole half and should have really done a lot more in that game. The difference being that the attack that they played with was really dodgy. It wasn't free-flowing at all like we've seen the last couple of weeks. So, a few things to consider in this game. First of all, the only difference in terms of opening fixtures is that Catalans played Leeds and Warrington played Hull KR. That's the only difference in fixtures. They both played Castleford and Hull and London, and then of course each other. So I think the margin for the game against Hull is in favour of Warrington. The margin against Castleford is in favour of Catalans. The margin against London is in favour of Warrington. So a lot of people will look at that first round and say, well, if it's kind of balanced in terms of teams that they've played against, then you go off round number 1. The reason why I'm not looking into that as much is because Warrington have appeared to be a different team since then. And I've not been totally convinced with Catalan's last few performances. So against Hull FC and Castleford, they have dominated, but their attack has looked sluggish. And especially down that left-hand side, looks very one-dimensional. It's just next man rugby, so it's just simply passing the ball down the line. Down that left-hand side, there hasn't been much creativity. And down the right-hand side, defensively for Warrington, is when they're most vulnerable. So if they're not offering much down that left side, the right side for Warrington defensively doesn't have too much to worry about. Whereas Catalan's right side, attacking-wise, is looking pretty good with Theo Farge. But defensively, that's Warrington's best side. Toby King and Matty Ashton are making really good defensive decisions. So it balances out in attack for Catalans. Defensively, Catalans haven't been troubled too much from Hull and Castleford. There's just a few moments where they've been allowed to get out of shape. And I think Warrington's attack now, compared to how it started this season, is looking a lot better than it was, and it's a lot more free-flowing. So there's a plus towards Warrington and a negative towards Catalans. The final thing is, given that both teams haven't really been tested too much, my only positive to look at for Warrington, because it's been London Broncos back-to-back, is at least the consistency of domination. That's the most important thing to see. So, you know, they had the biggest margin in Super League in round 5 and then dominated again the week after in the Challenge Cup. It could have been 60 plus if it weren't for a windy day, blowing the ball left, right and centre, and Stefan Ratchford missing almost every single conversion attempt, including Josh Thulis as well, missed a sitter or two as well. So I think the back-to-back domination, the consistency from Warrington, is a key sign that they are now a much more improved team than they were, and Catalans aren't quite the finished article. Neither are Warrington, of course. But just to lean it towards Warrington on those points I've made, I'm going to go with Warrington Wolves 20, Catalans Dragons 18. Next up, we have Salford Red Devils versus Leigh Leopards. Starting with league position, Salford sit in 7th, Leigh are in 9th. In terms of form this season, Salford have won 3 of their 5 games. Leigh have only won 1 of their 4 games. Salford were a huge disappointment last week, And given the points I said kind of against Hull KR, Salford were a real disappointment. And I was out at the time, I was at the cinema, and when I checked the result afterwards, I was thinking, there must be a red card in there somewhere. Like, there must be. And there wasn't. There simply wasn't. So Salford were way off the mark. However, all the good work that they've been doing the last couple of weeks, I don't think is completely undone by that performance. It is an outlier, and it is a problem. But I don't think that that suddenly means that Salford are now complete and utter garbage. The performance itself was garbage, but it doesn't make them as a team, as a whole, a terrible team. Leigh, I think, consistently have been fine. They just haven't really been getting the results that they really need, but they've been fine. They've not been an abysmal team, but they've not really set the league alight, kind of like they did for a lot of last season. And yes, they are missing key players, Lachlan Lamb, Edwin Apape. They are going to continuously be big misses. I'm not too sure when they're back, to be honest, but I do see a close game for this one because Leigh have, as I said, been fine. And Salford, I think, on a typical day, will kind of get back to normal. You do still have Mark Sneed in there. He is leading the Man of Steel race for a reason. That doesn't just happen from nowhere. So, given that Salford should bounce back in a more typical scenario, the game being a more typical scenario, Leigh haven't been getting the job done yet with victories, and Salford have still looked pretty good aside from last week. I'm still going to edge it towards Salford, but only slightly. So I'm going to go with Salford Red Devils 18, Leigh Leopards 14. Finally, for round 6, we have London Broncos versus Huddersfield Giants. Starting with league position, London are in 12th, Huddersfield are in 8th. In terms of current form this season, London have won 0 of their 5 games. Huddersfield have only won 2 of their 5 games. Huddersfield are the most inconsistent team this season. They are so up and down week to week. It is unbelievable. There was a point a few weeks ago where I was thinking that London, they played a top 4 team at some point, 4 top 4 teams at some point, so that includes St Helens, Wigan, Catalans and Warrington. Huddersfield have played quite a wide mix of teams so far, and they look really inconsistent. But I was kind of hoping, after the tough games that London had to deal with, they'd get used to the pace of the game a bit quicker, and that could still happen against Hull FC later in the season. It could happen against Castleford, but Huddersfield are just... There's too much of a gap between Huddersfield and that bottom 3. London are included in that bottom 3. So the Giants could really dominate this game for 80 minutes and easily hit 50 points again. They could easily do it. But I'm going to tone it back just slightly, just because of their inconsistencies, and I'd like to still think at some point the experience that London's been getting, being thrown in the deep end, will at least improve their defence week by week and will potentially limit the number of points that Huddersfield get. So Huddersfield could absolutely hit 50, maybe even 60, given the kind of performances they have put in so far this season and the Challenge Cup. But I'm expecting a dominant performance, but nothing too crazy, but it could still absolutely happen. But I'm waiting for that point where it just shifts for London. Given the tough games they've had, I'm waiting for that shift, and it will probably come against Castleford or Hull later in the season. But Huddersfield should be too dominant, and it's an opportunity for Huddersfield to kind of gain a bit more momentum from last week to this week, and maybe they start to get on track a little bit more and don't take a massive loss or an overwhelming loss like they did against Hull KR. It was a close result on paper. Like, the scoreline made it look favourable, but Hull KR, they kind of dominated that game for the entire time. But with all that being said, I'm going to go with London Broncos 6, Huddersfield Giants 34. So there you have my Super League Round 6 predictions. If you have your own predictions, do let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with new Super League content. But that's going to be it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.